Thanks, Edouard. I'm going to use moderator privilege and open the questioning by asking you a couple of things. We're not going to reopen the whole inheritance tax question in this country. We've been fighting about it for the last 10 years, and I think it's been pretty well settled now after a lot of arguments. Taxing leverage sounds good, but is also not likely. The folks who want to get rid of the home mortgage deduction at this point are smoking something. It's just not going to happen. But the VAT, the value-added tax, is now moving toward the center of our debate here, and we have a couple of Republican candidates who put it on the table, and it's getting some discussion. So I wanted to ask you for a little bit more information on how the VAT works in France, and you describe it as a very successful tax. What are the exemptions for, say, food and for lower income people? And briefly, how does it work?
Well, you have touched upon the key issue. We have a great VAT tax in France, but I think we have as many exemptions for the VAT tax as we have a number of different cheese or a number of different days in the year. So we have exemptions for everybody, you know, for restaurants, cafes, etc. And one challenge of my government right now is to make sure to close these holes so that this VAT gets efficient across the board. But it is indeed very efficient. Notably, take for instance the money that is spent by tourists going into New York or Chicago or San Francisco, going into hotels, etc., restaurants. This tax does not weaken your corporations or ability to produce. And it's good, and it's money very easily collected by the Treasury as well.
Okay, I'm hoping that we can move into, with your help, into some more of these specific remedies, since I think we all have a pretty good idea of the scope of the problem. Dave mentioned in his talk obliquely something about repatriation, which was tried in 2005 and did not work well. I want to ask the whole panel whether you think that repatriation, which is very much on the table, basically in exchange for corporations bringing their cash back from overseas, they get a tax break. Whether you think that that's a good idea right now. Anybody have any thoughts?
I'll start. I think it's a great idea. But you have to, as Dave said, you have to have some give back. There are so many special exemptions in the tax code that probably most of you in this room did not lobby for, that have to somehow be scratched off the books before a lot of the sensible things like repatriation of wealth can make sense. But it's actually distorting the financial markets where people, where U.S. companies are bidding more for foreign assets in mergers and acquisitions because they've got money offshore sitting idly, so to speak, and it's like money burning a hole in their pocket. They would rather pay up and overpay for foreign acquisitions than leave it sitting alone.
But why did it fail 6 years ago, and why would it be different today if we tried it again?
You know, I'm not the expert on the global tax policy, but you know, if you took the blank sheet of paper that we've spoken about many times today and started with a tax code that didn't penalize firms for building up cash offshore, I think that's the starting point for the really making progress.
And prior efforts have largely been around one-time tax holidays and not accompanied by sort of the structural reform of the tax code that solves the problem once and for all. So a one-time fix won't work here.
So it would have to be a permanent, or they would just move their money, continue to move money overseas with the hope of getting a subsequent holiday. It would essentially, without making structural changes, are you arguing that it would essentially incentivize them to take more money overseas with the assumption that they can get the break by bringing it home later on?
It incents them to grow jobs outside the U.S. to grow profit streams outside the U.S. because the tax treatment is so much more favorable. And given the charge that they're supposed to build shareholder value on a global basis, they will take those tax rules into account as to where resources and investments are made.
Anybody have ideas for using tax policy to encourage innovation and startups? There's been a lot of conversation recently about all the job creation provided by startups. By definition, those are all new jobs, and they provide a surprisingly high percentage of all jobs created. So what should we do to incentivize startups? Any thoughts?
A small French idea. As an individual, I can put up to 50,000 euros into a startup, and it's fully deductible from my wealth tax. All right. So it's a small thing, but you do have
fully deductible from the capital gain version of your capital gains tax.
Form of the capital gains tax. Yeah.
Okay. So if you're a new company, you get doesn't that incentivize existing companies to sort of break up and get the tax break by kind of creating phony new companies that aren't really new companies, and how do you guard against that?
Well, at least it finances growth and a corporation, indeed, that has the definition of a startup, of a new company. And I do it every year, and it's
The other idea that's gotten some traction in this country is focusing on job creation by small businesses, companies with less than 100 employees, which tend to generate about 75% of the jobs as you come out of recession. And the idea there is to help them out with the employer part of payroll taxes, some forgiveness or credit towards payroll taxes for small companies that are hiring new workers.
Yeah. I think I'd like to open this up if we can. I'll butt in every so often with more of my own questions, but great.
We've heard two hours of very good prescriptions for the American body politic. The problem, as I think any doctor would say, is getting the patient to quit smoking and stop eating unhealthy food. So I'm very interested in your counsel on what we as individuals can do and what the CED should do, and of course is doing, to actually get these recommendations executed, which to me is much, much harder.
Maybe to sharpen that even more, although you can answer it the way that fine question was posed, but even more specifically, what could CED do to push the super committee to come up with
the point of action here? I mean, Charlie, you were out the other day with comments about gridlock completely unacceptable, right? And I think that's, speaking for the panel, I would guess that's a sentiment of many people in this room, that the super committee needs to get its act together and drive some reforms here.
Thank you. I'm going to have to leave ahead of schedule, not to duck the question, but to make a comment here. We actually have a set of very detailed, McKinsey I think might call them granular, recommendations that we will release today that are intended to go directly to the super committee. And they touch on issues such as the details of actually reforming Medicare, reforming Social Security, the two major entitlements that are, particularly Medicare, the main drivers of the deficit. But then we also look at discretionary spending and defense spending, and then we also take a look at tax reform. So, and we were gathering support. We now have about 80 endorsers from senior business leaders, some on the board, but not all of them on the CED board. And for those of you who are here, we would like to, certainly the trustees and others, get your endorsement. We do find there's safety and persuasion in numbers. And through the work that we've been doing with our own corporate leadership and through Joe's work on the Bipartisan Policy Centers group, through efforts, I'm actually going off to do a Bloomberg discussion now on these topics. So we're going to spend the next month, which is a really critical month, trying to drive this message home, both to the super committee and also to the people in the Congress and elsewhere who will have a role in this. So, as Dave said, the voice of business is very important here, and we've made it work in other areas of CED's work, and we're going to do our very best here. So we've gone granular today, and would very much like to have your support as we go viral with that as well. So I will see you all later this evening.
I think we have time maybe for one or two more questions. Can I say one other thing about that? Go ahead, Byron.
I think, I just think the business community could also do more to help the public understand how fixing these problems will directly benefit the U.S. economy, will directly create jobs, and so forth. I think the public has a bit of a view that the only thing that business is looking for in terms of citing its facilities are tax breaks and low wages, whereas in fact there is a very strong interest in a more competitive environment, in infrastructure, in a level playing field, in a better workforce, and I do think across the board, business engaging not just around the specific detailed, tax breaks or subsidies that might benefit that business, but really making it clear to the public that business will be investing in the United States if these changes are made is really important, because I think there's a real loss of, I think there's a real lack of credibility in a partisan context when politicians are making different claims, and for business to credibly lay out what the economic benefits to the public, I think, is extremely important.
It is strange to me that when businesses' very specific interests are engaged, they will be all over Capitol Hill lobbying, but when their larger interests are engaged, they're sometimes kind of missing in action. And clearly this would be a case where their larger interests are engaged, and yet in the accounts of the lobbying on the super committee, it's all about sort of what in Washington are called rifle shots. They want their particular interest protected by the process. So just as a journalist, I'm going to be watching to see how CED and other business people of goodwill mobilize in the national interest over the next few weeks. So you're all actors in history. We're at what they call a hinge of history right now. When you're talking about trillions, this is not our fathers or grandfathers' budget debates. This is the mother of all budget debates that will condition a lot of what happens in the 21st century. So I think with that, we should probably wrap up the festivities, and thank you all so much for your attention.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was a great session. And those of you who are here for the CED trustees' activities, we'll be moving on to our next event at 2:30. If I could summarize this panel, I have two political bumper stickers that I've always thought were among the class of that form of art. One was a bumper sticker that reads, "I play the accordion and I vote." The other one is, "Do the right thing. You will baffle your adversaries and energize your friends." To summarize the remarks we've had here, if we could lift the burden of fiscal uncertainty off of our economy, we would get investors interested in the United States again. We would, I think, encourage consumers to think that they have a future and that they can begin to act toward it, and perhaps even move on to adopting some French methods of increasing revenues. But thanks to the panel who've done an excellent job. Thanks to Jonathan for moderating, and we'll be adjourned here and move on to the other activities of our board meetings. Thanks a lot.
Aye.